So, you remember sometimes a story, or you're reading something, you remember the story. You don't even remember the book, you just remember the story. So the author had a friend who he was witnessing to, sharing Christ with. The friend was a business owner. And this business owner said to him one day, came in and said, well, I had an experience today. He said, this young guy had been working for me. He'd been working for a couple of years, and he came into my office. And when he came into my office, he said, I just received Jesus this weekend. And I've been thinking about when coming back to work because I need to tell you a few things. There's times when I kind of cheated on the time card. I said I was here, but I really wasn't here. And there's times when I took some of the resources and materials from work and I brought them home. I stole them and I used them. And there was times I really didn't give you a good hour work that you paid me for. And I just want to let you know that I had been cheating to you and lying to you for the last couple of years. And that if you want to fire me, that's fine. I understand. I get it. I deserve that. But if you would like, we can work out an arrangement and we'll figure out a general amount that I owe you. And I'll do some extra work for you over and above what I normally do, and that will pay off what I owe you. And this friend said to the Christian, he goes, in all my years I've had a lot of Bible thumpers working for me, but it's that kid that had the most impact because he was so honest and so true that it impacted me how he came in and shared the truth about his life and what he'd been doing. And that's exactly what Jesus wants of us from his greatest sermon. It's the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew starts in Matthew 5 and goes to 7. And Jesus starts and he says, I want you to be salt and light. I want you to impact the world around you. I want you to be a light for me. I want you to be salt for me. And then he says, the way that you're going to do that is to obey me from the heart. This is not about keeping the rules. In churches, we have our rules, right? You do this, you don't do that. You make sure that we get points for being there. We get points for doing the right things, saying the right things, and showing up at the right times. But you can do all of that and still have a heart that's hard toward God. And Jesus said, your obedience has to start deep in here and come out. You start here because what is in here will come out, the good or the bad. It comes out into your life. And who you are in here will determine your acts. And I want you to be salt and light for me. And so it starts with heart obedience. And then he starts talking about a number of different issues that surprisingly are as true today as they were in Jesus' day. And so last night we talked about hating other people. Today we're going to talk about 3 L's that he's going to touch on. He's going to talk about lust, leaving, and lying. Matthew chapter 5, verse 27. You have heard it said. So that's rabbinic tool. You have heard it said. So he's going to go to what they know is common among them, what they understand and know. You have heard it said, don't commit adultery. And everybody say, yeah, I know that. But I tell you, so in the mind of the listener, if I just don't commit adultery, I'm okay with God. But Jesus goes, but I tell you, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully, or we could read in there, anyone who looks at a man lustfully has already committed adultery with that person in their heart. So this is a new standard. It's not enough for me to say, well, I haven't cheated on my wife or I haven't cheated on my husband. That's not enough. Jesus says that's not true righteousness. True righteousness is when in your heart you're pure, because what you think about in your heart will come out in your attitudes and actions. So on Sunday, Ken said, I had worked here 38, 40 years ago. I don't know. It's just so long ago. I was a lifeguard. And I was in that pool over there. It's shut now, but that was the main pool. The ones that's redone down there was the secondary pool. That was the main pool. And I was a lifeguard. And I would meet a lot of different people. And I remember this one guy. he would come each day, he'd set up his chair, and he was a real affable type of guy and would talk and everything. And one day we got into this discussion, and he just came out and said, I just like to come down here and look at the woman. So I'm 19 years old. I knew what he said wasn't right, but I was kind of taken back by it. He goes, don't save your breath. I know what you're going to say, lusting in the heart and all that. But he goes, God created beauty, and we look at it and we enjoy it, and God created beautiful women, and I'm just looking and enjoying God's creation. As long as I don't touch, I'm okay. Now, I wish I had had the presence of mind to say, hey, where's your wife? Do you bring her with you? But I didn't. And I tried to talk to him, but he just kept cutting me off. And I realized, so in his mind, he was justifying his behavior. It doesn't matter what's going on the inside as long as the outside is okay. Now, it's easy to be that guy, but aren't we like that? We go to church, been screaming and yelling at one another, at the kids. We'll walk in, we got the smile pasted on our face. As long as nobody really knows what's going on, it doesn't really matter what's going on in the car on the drive in. As long as we're okay and everybody sees that we look okay on the outside. But we do that in most of our relationships. Doesn't really matter what's going on. And I don't tell everybody what's going on the inside. But it's not about not telling everybody. It's about, am I honest with God and with those people around me I need to be honest with about what's really happening on the inside. Now, I don't think I have to convince any of you sitting here that lust is a sin when we're just thinking on it. I think what we need to remember is now what Jesus says about it. He says, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. And clearly a metaphor. Clearly he's not saying, gouge out your eye and throw it out. It's a metaphor. And then he says, it's better for you to lose one part of your body than the whole body to be thrown into hell. Gee, I wonder why he says that. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than your whole body to go into hell. And here's the metaphor, what he's saying. Why does he say eye and hand? Well, if you think about that, it's because they're the two parts of the body that are used most in lusting. And then why does he say if you don't deal with it, you'll go to hell? Because who we are on the inside determines the direction we have on the outside. And if you think you can sit at a pool and just lust after women or men, and you think that does not affect you and does not affect who you become and does not affect your decisions and does not affect your relationship with God, you are sadly mistaken. Who you are on the inside matters to Jesus. And it determines the direction of your life. And so Jesus, talking about lust, says you need to deal with it, and pretty drastically. And I don't think, again, any of you would argue with me that this is a sin. I think the reality is we just kind of, because it's one of those sins that hits so many of us so often, we just kind of learn to live with it, and we forget that we have to take extreme measures sometimes to deal with the reality of what's going on in our heart. That we have to gouge out the eye and cut off the hand, metaphorically speaking. We have to deal with the reality of what's going on in our heart, ruthlessly sometimes. If you don't deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me, you can't be my disciple, said Jesus. And so what does it mean to deny ourselves and take up our cross when it comes to lust? I think at least three things. One is, as soon as you start sensing it, you've got to pray. Like, it's amazing. You can't pray to Jesus and lust at the same time. Just when it comes, just start praying, and you'll find it's really hard to pray honestly to Jesus and then lust at the same time. You can't do, we really can't do two things at once anyway, but especially those two things at once. And so that's the first step, but you got to want to. It's not hard to pray. It's just, I want to sometimes when I'm lusting. The second thing is, we talked a lot about confession. It keeps coming up. I didn't intend for that issue to keep coming up, but it does. And you got to tell somebody. You can't win this battle alone. I mean, we can lust We can lust we can lust at a mall. We can lust at a pool. We can lust in front of a TV, computer screen. We can lust at a church service. Because it's all happening in here. And one of the things of people who have overcome lust that has really embedded in their life is they always told somebody. They always tell somebody. Somebody that can hold them accountable. Somebody that knows who they are, that can talk into it. And so the third thing is you got to take practical steps to be open and honest with your life. See, that's what Jesus is calling to, is this kind of life that's open. Who you are on the inside is who you are on the outside. I kind of feel like, this isn't the first time you've heard this. So I'm just going to end it. I'm going to end looking at that there and only to say, either you're winning or you're losing with lust. There's no kind of, you can't live with it. It will either consume you or you will begin to gain victory over it. And I say begin because it's a process and it's a lifelong struggle. But remember, who you are on the inside, what you focus on will come out. That's what Jesus is saying. And so if you're allowing lust to win in the inside, it affects your attitudes toward other people, it affects your decisions that you make, it affects your relationship with God. One of the things that most people say who are addicted to internet porn is their relationship, like their devotional life just gets flushed. Because you can't be watching this on the screen and then going to Jesus and praying and having regular time with Him. And so it's an issue that Jesus says you have to get a hold of. Now, the interesting thing I find is He knew it was an issue, and He shares how we deal with it. He doesn't say, you dirty people, how could you do? He goes, this is going to be an issue, and this you need to get a hold of it. And you need to be drastic about it. Okay, enough said on that. So he moves. So he goes from lusting to leaving. In other words, divorce. I mean, I don't like to speak about these topics. And Jesus just, choom, choom, choom. I think this is probably why He offended some people. Because He wasn't afraid to say it. It's been said, anyone who divorces is... Now, look who He's talking to here. He's talking to the men. Did you ever notice that in this passage? It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become adulterous, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. So let me just wade into this just with Jesus' words. So He's talking to men, and you have to understand the culture of the day that He's dealing with. If a woman were divorced, she would have no means. Very few women would have means to provide for themselves and their children if the husband didn't take the children. That she would have no means to provide for herself. And so giving her a certificate of divorce was allowing her now to remarry somebody else, which would allow her to provide for her, have some sort of support and income for her and possibly children if that was the case. And so they were saying, you're a righteous man if you are willing to give a certificate of divorce to the wife. And you know, if you've been, this has affected your family or you've been through it, divorce is rarely a very affable process. It's usually very vitriolic and harsh, and there's a lot of hurt and pain that goes in it. And so there's a lot of hatred and attacks back and forth. And so if you can hurt the other person, that's what we do sometimes when we go through these kinds of deep, painful situations. And so Jesus, they're saying, well, but if you're really a righteous person, you'll write a certificate of divorce. You'll be that good of a person that you'll care about your ex-wife, even though you're divorcing her, that you'll give her a certificate of divorce. And Jesus goes, Remember, He's talking about here. Talking about who we are on the inside, what we think about, what we want, what we desire, how they control us. And He goes, unless it's marital unfaithfulness, which my understanding of the text is that would give, that is the one condition that destroys a marriage in the eyes of God. Don't necessarily have to end the marriage, but it is one of the reasons why God says that a marriage will break down, and in His eyes it goes the opposite way. But He says, if anyone divorces except for marital unfaithfulness, You're causing your wife to become an adulterer. You're becoming a spiritual pimp. Be the effect of the words of Jesus. And then if you remarry, the divorced woman also commits adultery. So Jesus is pretty strong on this commitment, what a husband and wife make to one another. Like, he comes out pretty strong on it. Here's the problem. Our marriages sometimes are the things that cause us the deepest pain in our lives, right? So Crystal and I, several years ago, we came to a point, because of an event that happened in our lives, we came to a point where we were on opposite sides of this issue, and we couldn't resolve it. And what happened is we kept spiraling down, and we started blaming one another and taking attacks at one another, and it just was over time, and we could never resolve the issue that was between us. And we were really, it was an important issue to our family, and we just couldn't seem to get over it. And what was happening, we were spiraling down over time, going down, 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 and then the words that were said to one another began to hurt, and they lingered, and they caused pain in the relationship, and of course then you blame the other person, and so the blame kept going back and forth. And we got to the point where we were going, I don't know if I want to continue in this relationship. So we've been married quite a few years. We had 3 kids, and we had gotten to the point where we were saying, not sure we want to keep going. And if we had continued to do what we were doing, trying to deal with the situation we were dealing with, we would never have pulled out of it, I don't think. So finally, we humbled ourselves and said, we got to get to a counselor. This is out of our hands. We can't seem to come to any, it's been a lot of months, and we're not getting anywhere with this. And it's actually eating us up. And so we finally went to a counselor. So we took a different route. And we decided to bring somebody in, which, is kind of humbling. And we went to the counselor, and the counselor began to help us. We began to meet with this counselor on a regular basis. And the counselor began to give us insight into what was going on in our relationship, what was going on in each other's heart, because we'd stopped listening to one another at that point, and what was happening there. And of course, you got to listen when there's a counselor in the room, right? That's the thing. You can't argue. Like, you want to argue with what they say, but you got to be, you got to be civil in front of the so that started to get through. And then I began to hear what she was saying. She began to hear what I was saying. He began to give us, he said, now take this step, do this. And then we'd come back and report on it and do, and so it went from this to starting to go back, spiral up. And we started to regain a love for one another and a desire to go, we want to make this work. If we continued to do the same thing, we probably may not have, I don't think we would have lasted. And it may have taken some time, but we eventually would have just consumed one another because of the hurt and the anger that was in both of our lives. And so I think what Jesus is saying here, he's saying, here's from the heart, here's my expectation of you, that you make it work. And if what you're doing isn't working, change it. Change what you're doing. Now, if you're not willing to change, then you don't know where it's going to go, because if you're spiraling down, you're not willing to change, it's probably going to keep going down. And Jesus said, from the heart, like the heart change in Crystal and I was, we didn't do things differently outwardly, we did them in the heart. First, we had to humble ourselves and admit the truth of what was going on, and then say we're going to get help. And so I think that's really the essence of remember, he's talking about what's happening on your inside here. And he uses divorce which is an outward thing, and he goes, no. Writing the certificate of divorce, that's not righteousness. Righteousness is from your heart, you're willing to do whatever it takes to make it happen. Now, I am totally realistic, or I'm totally understand. Some of you sitting here maybe have gone through divorce, and you go, well, here I am, I'm getting beat up again about the divorce that happened in my life. What do I do about it? I think you do the same thing as if, you're angry and you said these words to somebody in your family and they were mean and harsh, and then you come across the verse that goes, be angry and sin not, well, what do you do then? Or you were lusting, and then you were on the screen even before you came here. You were on the screen, and you walked in, and then oh man, he's preaching on those verses that don't, if you look on a woman lustfully, that's sin. What do you do then? Well, you do the same thing. You confess, and you go, God, what do I got to do to change what I can change? That's the same thing with divorce. Yeah, sin happened, a mistake happened, but you're not done with Jesus. That's what the cross is all about. The cross is about Jesus reconciling us to the Father. And so when you see something in Scripture, you go, I failed, you go and confess it, and then you ask God, well, what do I do from here? So it's easy to talk about divorce. The ideal, see, this is the grace and truth. The ideal is that you make it work, but sometimes it doesn't. That doesn't cancel the grace of Jesus Christ. You confess your sin, and then you say, now, God, what's my next step? So I just want to pastorally say to you that if you're gone through that, or a child of yours has gone through this, that doesn't disqualify them from the grace of God. Yeah, it brings a lot of pain in their life, and yeah, it was a failure, but it doesn't disqualify anyone from the grace of God. One of the things I like about our church, Springvale, and I have two people here who embody this. They are some of the most grace-filled people I have ever met. And that when people walk in our doors that have gone through painful situations like divorce, they are loved. Judy, you and your husband are perhaps the two most loving people of sinners I've ever met. And so maybe, I don't know, Bill, maybe you just have lived long enough to realize that showing grace and love to people is the way that Jesus would have us do it, and he'll take care of the rest of the stuff. And so that's what I love, that kind of spirit. And I think that's what Jesus is looking for. Let me finish with this oath thing. The oath is the next thing. So bang, he hits the lust, then he hits the leaving, and now he hits the oath thing. We don't use oaths much anymore because we have contracts, and most of us can read and write, and we have contracts in computer. You can sign digitally, the whole bit. But keep in mind, Jesus is talking to a world where 98% of the people couldn't read or write, and even if they could, they couldn't afford any of the expensive writing tools that would have been taken in order to do a contract. So if you were doing a building contract, like building a home, or selling something, especially if it was expensive, or arranging a marriage, which was common, today we would write out contracts, what the expectations were. But then they didn't have that ability, so they would make oaths. They would say, this is what I'm going to do, and then they would make an oath to say, I want to make you sure you know that I'm going to do this. And so, because, when people make agreements, then when it comes time to do the agreement, it's funny, they have a different viewpoint on that discussion than you do. You said I never said I would do that. You said you would do this. I didn't say I would do that. And so then what they would say is they would say, to convince the people that this is what I'm going to do, they would say an oath. Oh, because if you swear an oath and you don't keep it, God will get you. And interestingly in this, some commentators would say that depending on the oath, the closer the oath was to something that was close to God, the more accountable you were to it. And that's why Jesus talks the way he does. He says, again, you've heard it said to people long ago, don't break your oath, but keep the oath that you have made to the Lord. That was an Old Testament commandment. But I tell you, don't give oaths at all, either by heaven, or for it's God's throne, or by earth, for it's his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great king. Don't swear by your head, for you cannot make it even one hair white or black. Simply let your yes be yes, and your no be no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. And what Jesus says, get rid of the oath thing. Just be a person of integrity. When you say yes, mean yes. When you say no, mean no, and keep to your word. Now, last night I really emphasized, when we obey Jesus, people see Jesus, right? So when you obey Jesus, people see Jesus. But notice, Jesus is talking, it first starts inside your desires, your intentions, what you think on. That's where the battle is, because that will come out. Everything that's in here will come out. Good or bad, it comes out into your action. And when you seek to follow God and to obey God, you become a new person. And people see that. And when you obey Jesus, people see Jesus. Your words mean nothing if your actions are the same as people in the world around you. A lot of our friends, their opinion of churches, it's just a bunch of hypocrites because they have encountered people, Christians outside the church, who their actions are just the same as everybody else, and their words, you can't trust them. And Jesus is saying, look, if you really want to be salt and light in your world, then attend to the life here and then allow that to be lived out. Following Jesus starts with what we do in here. Starts with obedience from the heart. And once we get our hearts focused on Jesus and we're seeking Jesus, the right actions will come out. Actions that will show that we're salt and light in our world. And so that's the message of Jesus. He keeps going through issue after issue to show us, first start with your heart. So I want to pray over you right now, if you want to bow your head. And I want to pray over you as we kind of absorb what the Word of God said. Jesus, I pray for your help for us with regard to lusting, with regard to leaving, and with regard to lying. It occurred to me, the very last phrase that you say on that oath part is, when we lie, we're more like the devil, because Jesus said, you are a liar from the beginning, and lying is your native language. And when we lie, we are more like Satan than we are like our Father. My prayer is today that you'll put within our heart a desire to please you. Now, I know the conflict, because even as I'm speaking these things, I know that I'm not perfect in these things. And so this is that sanctification battle that we go through. And would you help us to gain ground on our hearts this week as we sit under the teaching of your word, as we worship you through our times here, as we listen to Tony and talk about what you are doing in his part of the vineyard. We pray that you would begin to change our hearts and help us to take the next step we need to take. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.